Welcome to another conversation on the President's Forums podcast. Today, we're going to focus on an issue that's near and dear to our hearts. It's working learners. As you may know, the President's Forum is quickly becoming the voice of working learners because our institutions are laser focused on serving those who may be a little older or who are working full or part-time, who are raising children, serving in the military, or maybe caring for aging parents. You get the point. The list can go on, but these are students that are not traditional 18-year-old students. They're not staying in dorms. They don't have a meal plan. These students, these working learners, are balancing life with learning. So today our guest is Mark Milliron. He's the president of National University, and Mark and National are leading the way in finding flexible pathways for these students. Let's get right to it. I'm here today with Mark Milliron, the president of National University. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, Wes.
Hey, Newsweek recently ran an article that you wrote. It's titled "The Rise of the Anders, Retooling Higher Education to Meet the Needs of Working Learners." I'd love to talk to you about that article today.
I'd love to jump in. The conversation around Anders is near and dear to National University's heart.
I figured that you'd be a willing interview on this since you are the author, but we want to get into the very basics first. Tell us about the demographics that we're seeing in higher education. What is changing and why is this an issue?
Yeah, I'll begin quickly before I jump to the demographics, just real fast. The Ander conception really comes from the idea that our students are always in this space of living multiple ands. So they are parents and students. They're in the military and students. They are employees and students. Often they're caring for aging parents and students. And living in the and is difficult, and it's different from the traditional student who's living on campus going full time. And let's be blunt, the majority of higher education is architected, regulated, promoted with traditional students in mind. And these non-traditional working and military students who live these and lives are just different.
I love the line in this article where you talk about these students aren't necessarily defined by being students. That's part of their identity, but huge parts of their identities lie outside of being learners, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that's difficult, because a lot of educational institutions, they're pretty about themselves, and they're used to students being all about them, about being a student. And what's difficult is how important it is for these working adults and non-traditional students and military students is to have an institution that is willing to see them, that knows and wants them to belong with all of their ands, and that wants to meet them where they are and take them where they need to go.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so you get into the demographic description and the problem that we have in current higher education right now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, here's, so in audiences all the time, I'll have them close their eyes and I'll tell them to picture a college student and get that picture really solid, see them from top to bottom and have them open their eyes. And invariably, 95% of the audience is thinking about an 18 to 20-year-old kid with a backpack over their shoulder standing on the quad. The traditional student that's living on campus going full time. What we know is that a student going full time, living on campus, not working, represents about 20% of higher education.
Wow.
And it's completely blows people's mind that the majority of people in higher education are now on different kinds of journeys. And it's really important that we're willing to meet them where they are and take them where they need to go, as I said before.
So what are some of the challenges that working learners face today?
Yeah, I think it's, the difference between classical music and jazz. Like if you're playing classical music, you've got the notes are written out, the stanzas are ready for you, and you're able to follow the guidelines. That's the traditional model for that 18-year-old walking onto a wonderful, beautiful campus. And I don't begrudge any of them that. That's fantastic. But for these students, it's much more like playing jazz. Meaning you have to understand what are their strengths and like the rhythm and patterns of their lives are different. And you have to be able to let them play to those strengths, which means the time for them to learn might be after the kids go to bed. It might be during on breaks at work. It might be They're going to have projects heavily. If they're an accountant, they have heavy projects all the way through April 15th, and suddenly their life opens up a little bit. And so they can take more classes then. So part of this is having the flex where they don't have to just read the sheet music and go in that pace. You actually can play jazz with them and allow them to go fast when it's time for them to go fast, go slow when it's time for them to go slow. And again, the idea is you could play some really beautiful music. It's just going to sound a little different.
So give me some specifics that National does to help them play jazz. What are the things that the flexibility that National provides to these working learners?
Yeah, probably the thing we're best known for is from 1971 on, we kind of really leaned into the idea of one course a month. So a traditional student is going to take 4 and 5 courses over 16 weeks. If you're a working student raising 2, 3 kids, maybe caring for an aging parent, the ability for you to take 4 to 5 classes over 16 weeks and not have life happen during that span is very low. And if life does happen, you're not just going to drop one course, you drop all 5. And it's a huge problem. It's one of the reasons why, and you know the statistic, there are 40 million people in this country with some college and no credential. And most of them left in good academic standing. They left because life and logistics, psychosocial, and just like the fact that they don't belong in traditional higher education. So one of the things we did is we created a model where it's one course per month. And one course per month, 4-week courses, it works, especially military students. They actually are deployed on 30-day schedules so that actually they can finish a class. But it's cognitive load, Wes. What you see is somebody can take one class at a time while they're raising kids and while they're working, because it's not trying to keep 5 different pieces of courseware in their mind, 4 different. I can focus on one thing at a time, though, and knock it out. So it's been our secret sauce for a long time. Our core model was based on that more than it ever was online learning, because online learning didn't exist in 71.
That makes so much sense to me. Just the idea that in your brain, you don't have multiple classes that you're trying to balance and you're saying deadlines for that class and this instructor is saying this and I've got to keep all that straight. The one course focus. I can see why that would be really
and then for doctoral students, we're about 60% graduate, 40% undergraduate. And for our doctoral students, we have a one-to-one, basically a one-to-one Oxford model, where you have a major faculty member that you're with that takes you through the entire way, but you're learning in your pace in a one-to-one format. It's not even class-based. It's the same thing. It's the idea for a working student that's perfect for them. It's the model that really fits their life. And again, part of this is, I don't begrudge traditional education, anything about what they're doing. That's phenomenal. But for the non-traditional working and military student, this is the kind of innovation you need to have in your skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up on an election in November that's huge. We're going to hear over and over it's the most important election of our lifetime, and we're picking between a lot of different things. But one of the things that will happen, no matter who wins, is there will be a transition of power. Either a Harris administration will take over from a Biden administration, or a Trump administration will take over from a Biden administration. So we know that that's going to happen. If you were advising the Department of Education during a transition, either of the transition teams, you were to say, hey, this is something that's a really important thing that we get right. What can a future administration do to support the Anders, the working learners?
Yeah, I think 3 things. I think one is recognition that a big chunk of higher education is made up of people who are Anders, people who are non-traditional working and military students. That recognition is really important, because whenever anybody's talking about higher education and often in the federal or in federal government or in states, they're talking about traditional education, and they basically say college and university, and it's synonymous with traditional. They have to speak more broadly, and that recognition really matters. When they actually talk about institutions and students more broadly, people feel like they're belonging as a part of that kind of community of learners. So that recognition, it's not a little thing, it's a big thing. It's making sure, Sarah Goldberg-Rabb is fond of saying, shut up about Harvard. Like, I'm glad Harvard does what it does, but you've got to be willing to talk about other kinds of institutions and embrace them, whether it's places like National, Western Governors, Southern New Hampshire, or like community colleges. Like, there are other players doing the kind of work that is reaching and teaching a lot of people. So recognition's first. Second is, I think, on the regulation side, I'll call it the Ander pause. And the Ander pause is anytime you are thinking about proposing a regulation, take a beat and think about, does this work for Anders? Does it work for non-traditional working and military students? And often what you're going to find is we have some implicit biases around how higher ed works, and that implicit bias is based on how we went, and most of us went through traditional models. So we need to just take that breath, and that Ander pause is going to be super important. And if you have that kind of recognition and that kind of regulation framework, then it's going to be about kind of welcoming different kinds of voices to the fold to help in that policy development and project development. And that's where a place like the President's Forum can help, because you have a family of institutions that can come together and help shape or inform policy and practice to make sure it's actually designed in a way where the classic cycle that we see is regulations thrown out, it's heavily biased towards traditional, it gets a great horrible reaction, and then people have to fix it after the fact. Let's get upstream. Let's actually design it with empathy for the broad family of students, traditional and non-traditional, that is actually trying to make a difference for.
So I love your transition into, this is an area where the President's Forum can be very helpful. Tell me, as we look to make the President's Forum, solidify the President's Forum as the voice of working learners moving forward, what should the President's Forum be thinking and doing in transition and with a new administration to enhance the outcomes for working learners?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one of the first things we have to do is we're so passionate about our models that sometimes it comes off as though we are preaching against other models of education. I think so. One of the most important things we can do is really think about how we champion better with arguments, not better than arguments. The truth is our country is better with a family of options for students. Those options are going to obviously include traditional education along with community colleges and non-traditional players like National University and the entire President's Forum. And that better with is saying we are better with this family of options, because when you're 18 and you want to go to a campus-based experience, for the love of God, don't come to National. That's when you want to go to a more traditional player. But when you're working and you're 35 years old trying to take care of your kid and caring for an aging parent, we're the flex model that kind of works for that. So our country's better in the better with. So we need to be champions of better with. Second thing is ruthlessly liberating good ideas. And what that means is we need to share with each other in a community of practice all the different strategies and ways that we're actually trying to be able to teach and reach and serve the students we care about. Because this community of practice has a unique skill set that's distinct from traditional education. We're not going to find this at an APLU conference. We're not going to find it at a traditional conference. We have the ability to share practice and to be able to get clear about like how that practice can make a difference, research it, really kind of be able to kind of drive that. And then once we kind of do that practice work and get that innovation down and share it, we also then can do the analysis around the third big thing, which is it often needs enabling policy to make it work, right? Without enabling policy, whether that's federal, state, or like sometimes it's accreditation support. And that's where we have to kind of bring our policy heft to bear and say, here are some enabling policy structures that are going to allow this innovation to really take shape so these students can be served. By the way, those three elements, they work with each other, because if you can enter in a better with conversation as opposed to better than, you don't activate the immune system of higher education. Right. You actually enter as a partner. And then your sharing allows the energy to kind of go with that. The regulatory, the work you're doing on regulations then enables that, and then suddenly good stuff can happen.
Great counsel, great insight. Mark, we're going to share this article far and wide, and we'll make sure that we accompany it with this interview so our readers and our listeners can have more context. And, in the future, what we hope to be able to do is exactly, those steps that you've outlined become an asset in the policymaking process and be able to represent working learners in a way that's really effective for them.
That's great. Well, thank you, Wes. Thank you for catalyzing these conversations. They really matter.
Good to see you.